Welcome to the Call to Flourish podcast. My name is Thomas Cronquist. I'm your guest host with Father Charles Sikorsky, the president of Divine Mercy University. Father, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Tom, and I'm looking forward to learning more today about our topic, which is human trafficking.
Yes, we have Dr. Ben Keys, Dr. Benjamin Keys, again with us today. He is a professor here at Divine Mercy University and the director of the Center for Trauma and Resiliency Studies. Dr. Keys, how are you doing?
Excellent, Tom. Thank you for having me.
Well, we have as Father said, a very interesting topic, human trafficking. It sounds like a very sad topic, but I'm sure you'll give us some very important insights and about the topic. So, Father, Dr. Keys, please tell us about human trafficking.
Well, let me start by saying that my introduction to this was about 15 years ago when I was first up here in the Virginia area. And a person from one of the organizations in Washington, D.C. approached myself and a colleague of mine of helping them to sponsor a conference on human trafficking. Not having very much background in it, I set out to basically really look at, from the perspective of disorders, what human trafficking was about, what it looked like, who was involved. And what I found has both disturbed me and moved me in such a way to really get involved with doing something about this. Human trafficking is really defined as a situation when force, fraud, coercion are used to initiate or enforce a sexual act against someone's will. And victims can be found on the streets, on the back pages of certain magazines, massage parlors, brothels, strip clubs, escort services, hotels, pretty much around the world, but certainly around the country. It has grown tremendously in the last few years, although it's been something that unfortunately has been around for hundreds of thousands of years. It's just it's horrible.
Dr. Keys, I think you once told me that it's common in our backyard. I think people would associate that with maybe something remote, something far away in a city or something. But you told me that it happens all around us in suburbs and in cities. Can you talk a little bit about its prevalence?
In the United States, the typical age of someone who is trafficked as a minor is between 12 and 14 years old. And up to 100,000 people a year that are minors in this country are trafficked. There's another, I think the total is somewhere around 400,000 that are vulnerable to it. So it really is a problem here in the United States. And we don't so much import anymore. It's cheaper to develop our own, if you will, in country. Adults are trafficked very much the same way as minors are, but those numbers are a little harder to get a handle on because we find many of them in jails. We find them having been arrested for prostitution or soliciting. And it's, like I said, it's just insidious.
So who perpetuates this? Like, who profits off of it? And how do they go about their work?
The trafficker is the one that profits off of this. And unfortunately, trafficking happens on a number of levels. It happens on a local level. It happens with gangs. It happens with just networks, very organized organizations that run this as if it was a legit business. The larger groups obviously have networks that extend in multiple countries. The locals are usually just local pimps that have 3 or 4 girls that they will run, where the girls are having sex with up to 10 men a night. Sometimes that number gets a little bit larger. They usually have quotas that they have to meet, and that's usually 6 to 7 days a week. Its motivation is money, straight out. This is greed. A single trafficker that has, say, 3 girls can make about $1.5 million a year. I mean, for walking the streets and setting up interludes and plying their trade, that's a lot of money.
During the Super Bowl, there's an increase in trafficking. Is that right, Dr. Keyes? You've heard about that?
Yes. They will typically bring 10,000 extra girls
to the Super Bowl. Oh,
Yep.
to where the game is.
Yep.
Oh my God. Well, I guess maybe it won't happen this year because they're not going to have many fans, but wow.
Yes. Depending on where it's played, it's not necessarily the people that are attending the Super Bowl, because a lot of people just go to be in the atmosphere. They go to being around it.
Right.
It's like any other big sort of thing. If you don't have tickets, it doesn't matter, because somebody will have the game on somewhere. It's just being in the circus of what's going on, and in the mix of the players and the paparazzi.
Are there people who are more vulnerable than others? Is there a way to protect those who are more vulnerable? How would you identify those people, and what can you do to protect them?
Particularly as a juvenile, these are adolescents who typically are lonely, isolated. They're probably not getting along well with their parents. That's often how they're met, is that the trafficker finds them online, that finds them in a neighborhood or in an area that they might be in for a while. For instance, we're in the DC area. They might be in the DC area, and so when they go to a mall or they go to a coffee shop, they may find a girl that's sitting by themselves, looking sad or looking down, or there are certain characteristics. As they find out about the conflict with parents and other kinds of things, it slowly develops that one of the techniques is that they get groomed as their girlfriend. And so just gradually, the trafficker will be there for them, will support them, maybe provide them something that the parents aren't providing them. And over a very short period of time, he becomes the boyfriend. And then what he starts doing is isolating her by getting rid of close friends, moving her further and further away from the parent. And then at some point, he suggests that they move to another city. And one day he picks her up, takes her to another city, and then maybe says to her, we really need the money. I really need you to take care of this other guy sexually. It'll be the only time. Or the other technique might be to just beat her up and say, you depend on me for everything. And You can't go home now because your parents won't take you back, and I'm the one that's going to provide you, so you're going to do what I tell you to do.
What now you talk about girls. Are there also boys who get trafficked, and
There are.
the proportion of that might be?
Yeah, there are, but the numbers are quite different, depending on whose research you're reading. It's like 1 in 8 or 1 in 10. So yes, there are predominantly homosexual men that are looking for young boys. And again, also between the ages of 12 and 14. They're often groomed to certainly be at least 18. They're not 18, but they will tell you that they're 18. And it's usually the larger cities that you see the men or boys that are tricked out. The predominance of numbers, like I said, are girls. They're usually moved away from their local location, but usually not too much. It could be 1 or 2 states away. But it's enough that they usually don't know what's available to them or who they can talk to. The trafficker has definitely made the point that, if they were to ever try to get away or say anything, he would harm the brother, the sister, the parents, and the violence that usually goes with this is just tremendous. It's slavery. This is it's modern day slavery is really what human trafficking is about.
If you suspect that someone is in a bad relationship, maybe leading to some type of human trafficking, what as a parent or as a friend, what can you do?
Well, first let's talk a little bit of the symptoms. What are you looking for? Is the person free to come and go as they want to? Are they being controlled by another person? In other words, they're not able to speak for themselves. So the other person gives health data or identification. And quite honestly, this is how clinicians, doctors, psychologists will end up finding them in their office. They'll get arrested, for instance, for trafficking, or they'll get arrested for prostitution, and they'll be sent to counseling. And so they come into the office, but the trafficker is the one that is controlling this and gives the information and talks for the other person. I've had it happen twice now. Very few personal possessions. They won't have identification. Trafficker usually will take the identification away. They'll talk about working unusually long hours, excessively long hours, often without breaks. They don't keep the money that they're made. So they often do not have money, and they will tell you that they owe a lot of money because they're possibly in what's called debt bondage. If they've been brought into the United States, for instance, they may have anywhere from $20,000 to $25,000 that they have to pay back to the people that brought them into the country as a debt. So they're brought into often they're brought into restaurants, for instance, and then they're told that they find that the money that they're making, they're getting further and further in debt, and they're told, well, if you really want to make extra money, you can work in the bar, and if somebody suggests something, take care of them sexually, and you get extra money. the debt bondage is interesting because it happens on a lot of different levels. They may be brought in, for instance, as nannies, or they may be brought in as working domestically, cleaning houses. And very often they're brought into houses where they know that, for however they know that they may get propositioned. And if they get propositioned, then their job is to sexually do whatever that person is propositioning them to do. That money goes to the trafficker. That money goes to the person that had arranged this or set this up. That usually graduates them as they get better and better at what they do. It may graduate them to working for an escort service or working for any number of ways where they can make more and more money to pay back the debt. They never pay back the debt, by the way. They're always on the hook for that until they age out. If they age out, they're usually just left to fend for themselves. In other words, they're dumped onto the street and they've got to figure out what they're going to do.
Do clinicians who would see these people with their trafficker, are they trained to recognize that the situation is abnormal, is bad, there's something going on here? Would most clinicians, psychologists recognize that something nefarious is going on here?
Unfortunately, no. Very few programs are teaching about trafficking, which is unfortunate. I had a good friend who is a doctor in Ohio, has dedicated the last 10 years or so to working with hospital systems to train the doctors in the hospitals of how to spot this and how to look for certain things. And quite a lot of hospitals, as a result, have been able to stop traffickers and have had them arrested.
Are there connections here with like pornography, and does that lead into this, or do the traffickers use their clients, so to speak, to produce pornography and things like that?
I love this question. I love it because it's not what you would think. Pornography has the effect of objectifying women or men. It makes them sexual objects. Mm-hmm. What that does is, as a pornography addiction rises, the person that's sort of locked in that needs more and more stimulation or more and more ways of being sexually aroused. So they start doing more and more dangerous kinds of things. One of those things is to see prostitutes. One of those things is to visit areas where they'll be sexually propositioned. And that's what feeds it. It's the, you know, it really is a supply and demand kind of situation. The demand is there, and the trafficker will supply. I've not known a lot of trafficked folks to be forced into pornography, although that's certainly within the realm of possibility. It's really more that the pornography is sort of often an entry into being trafficked. The trafficker promises that you know, they'll make more money, they'll have more opportunity, etc. And during a time when they're struggling to make ends meet, or they're not being hired for films, they'll hook up with a pimp or with a trafficker and be trafficked that way. So it's more of an entry in.
And you mentioned there's some of the international, like people would be recruited to be just to work in the United States, and they give them a loan to get them here. Does a similar process, would that happen also with people who are from this country that they start them off kind of thinking, well, here's a way to help you out of your problem, and then they maybe get a dependence on the trafficker, and then the trafficker says, well, hey, you really want to make more money, here's what you need to do? Or is that sort of the...
That actually tends to be more in other countries than in the United States. In other countries where there are economic, just real severe economic problems. For instance, I was in Kenya, and the way the traffickers were operating was that they would go to the families, and for the price of a meal and the promise of more food on a regular basis, parents would offer their children up, not knowing what was behind, because what was being offered was, we'll take you to the Emirates, for instance, or into Saudi Arabia, and they'll work for prominent families, and they'll have extra money to send home, and you'll be able to feed the rest of your children. And so the father and the mother think they're doing this wonderful thing for their daughter, and it will now benefit the whole family. And it's usually about a month or two when the letters stop coming home. The original letters are often dictated by the trafficker, usually with a little bit of money, so that the parents start to feel comfortable. It's really not till about 6 months into it that they really realize what's happened. Yeah. And I've seen that in Sudan. I have seen that in many countries in Africa, but also in Eastern Europe. But what's interesting about Eastern Europe is that they work on a different basis. The traffickers there live in luxury houses. They buy the most expensive clothes for their girls. They feed them meals and food. They eat at the best restaurants in the country. The idea is you can run away whenever you want, but you'll be back. Because they know that they cannot live that kind of lifestyle anywhere in the country. And so they've taken a very opposite approach, which works, unfortunately.
So if you recognize some of these warning signs that you described, how should a friend or a parent or an associate, how can they help? What would you do to help this person if you suspect where this might be going, where the relationship might be going with this person you know?
If you are a parent and you start noticing that your child is all of a sudden has a whole different set of friends, they have money or clothing that you didn't buy them, they start having expensive things that you didn't get them, that the boyfriend clearly is older, seems to be very controlling, this is something that you really need to intervene and stop and do something about, because the person is at risk, and being at risk, they're moving in the only direction that they seem to think they know how to move. It's sitting down and talking it through, if you can, with your child, although the child is likely to be very defensive by that point. So it might be getting them out and to another relative that they can stay with for a while. Changing the environment disrupts that pattern. The problem, though, is that there are all kinds of ways around everything, and even at 16, most 16-year-olds know how to get to a phone, and they know how to call, and they know how to get the person to pick them up, even at a relative's house. So you really do need to talk with them and just really lay it out as to what could happen.
Can you get law enforcement involved, or is that premature?
It's premature. Law enforcement can only act on something that's happened. They cannot act on something that hasn't happened yet. And even though it's certainly scary and it's a warning, they just can't get involved. And our laws are structured that way.
Are there any signs of hope or positive signs that you've seen or progress that's been made to help these young people get out of this? And if so, what are some of the I'm sure there are mental health consequences and how do we help them? And what can we do? Obviously, we can obviously, make this, insist that this become a law enforcement priority and so forth. But like, what are some strategies that have worked?
One of the strategies that I've seen is really talking and getting to know the women on a personal level. I've seen this in many countries where organizations have spent time getting to know, say, the brothel madams and coming into the house, and being able to talk to the women. It's a counterintuitive strategy, if you think about it, is to befriend the trafficker or the gateway, but it's really a positive strategy, because if you can begin to turn one, then that one can begin to have an influence on others. And I've seen that happen on a lot of different levels. Once somebody that has been in the life for a period of time, they often get to a place where they panic and they've got to get away. And sometimes they're able, and most of the time they're not. And of course, not being able to get away usually means that you're going to get beaten. You're going to be harmed even further, or possibly killed. That's part of the deterrent. Drugs are always available to numb things out so that you don't have to feel as you are sexually servicing 10 to 12 men per night. And so that also keeps them disconnected from services. They don't know what's available for help. They don't know what's out there that can get them on their feet, or get them sort of retract onto things. Unfortunately, more and more beds in this country have gone away for human trafficking. The federal government, for instance, has only really been involved in this since 2001. So it's only been from 2001 that they've been investing monies at all into the problem of trafficking. The beds that are available very often are Christian organizations that have made those beds available, but they're limited. Right now there's about 200 to 300 beds in the country for 10 to 15,000 women. So yes, it's a little disheartening, but we're finding that more and more organizations are getting involved. More and more counties are developing task forces. They're developing halfway homes for restructuring. Part of the problem has also been both from a treatment standpoint and from an economic standpoint. The economic standpoint is that they produce hundreds of thousands of dollars every year, and yet when they're brought into programs, they're often placed in minimum wage jobs. that doesn't make any sense. They're not going to stay doing that for very long. They're going to go back to the street.
Mhm.
And so new tactics have had to be in place where they can make a decent living at a middle to upper middle income if they get retrained and refocused. So for instance, programs now are training them in real estate, are training them in insurance, are in training them in ways that they can make a decent living rather than a subsistence living. The way I got into this really was that I had already developed a keen interest in working with sexual trauma. Well, this is sexual trauma on steroids. And almost to a one, every program that I was working with, the women involved or the adolescents that were involved had a diagnosis of PTSD, dissociative disorder, or dissociative identity disorder.
Mhm.
Or borderline personality disorder. And so the combination of those diagnoses really is almost the entirety of our category in the DSM-5 for trauma disorders. So it was a really good population to work with to really test any kind of treatment. Along the way, I developed a model, which I unfortunately can't talk about here, but maybe another time. That was a faith-based model to work with complex trauma. And all of those diagnoses basically are complex trauma. And we tested it out, and over a 7-year period of time, we found that that the model had an effect of decreasing all the symptoms of PTSD. It had the effect of increasing resiliency, increasing positive God image, just really had a solid positive effect on the lives of the people that were going through treatment. We're still writing up that research, but it has some hope of a survival, and it has some hope of being something that's effective that can be offered with this population. We have suffered in working with trafficking because we really haven't had very many models that stood up to this. We haven't had a lot of models to work with trafficking. When we're finding some things coming up, SAMHSA has authorized, I think, 2 or 3 models now that have some effect on working with survivors of trauma. Yet you really have to understand that this is not an opportunistic situation for the victim. They've been used, they've been manipulated and coerced, they have been beaten and traumatized. I was working with one program in California, and they took all the adolescents that were part of this program, and of course, programs that usually operate with few beds. So this was a program that had basically 6 beds. 5 of them were filled. So 5 of these women went to this clinic in San Francisco. And I don't know if you're familiar with Dr. Daniel Amen, but he's been very well known for working with brain scans, SPECT scans, that affect attention deficit. And he did SPECT scans of all 5 of these women. And the comment is interesting because he said, I know this brain. He said, all five of these have the same brain. And of course, the director of the program said, and what's that? And he said, this is the brain of a Holocaust survivor. That the impact of the trauma was such that was so devastating that it had the impact of someone who had lived through a concentration camp during Nazi Germany.
Wow.
Wow.
So this was a child who was trafficked, had the brain shape and so forth, because they can do these scans now that can pick this stuff up.
Yeah.
Wow. You mentioned, I know you're also the director here of our Center for Trauma and Resiliency Studies, and you do trainings. Do you have one for human trafficking? And if some of our listeners were interested, how would they learn about that?
We do a portion of our complex trauma training. It's called the H.E.A.R.T model, where we focus directly on human trafficking. I'm still very much involved in working with human trafficking. I'm still doing research in that area. I work with a number of programs as a consultant. And I'm just very, very excited that I can give back this way, because a lot of it is I'm not being paid for, but it's to make a difference. And I think that all of us, whether we're clinicians or whether we're just people that are at home, can make a difference. We can do lots of different things. We can donate, for instance. We can obviously pray. That's probably our strongest weapon, is praying for these people. And we can work for advocacy by writing to our legislators and advocating for more beds, for instance, for treatment, and advocating for help for minors that get pulled out of the life, and they refer to it as the life. We can change things, all of us.
Dr. Keyes, I think, unfortunately, we're running out of time here. One last question, possibly. If someone is a victim of human trafficking and they want out, but they're afraid, is there anything they can do? You would recommend a phone call to make? How might that person find a way out? What would you recommend if somebody would happen to see this podcast and can you is there an answer? Are there answers?
Get someplace to safety. I'm thinking of an organization like Truckers Against Trafficking, where they're just at truck stops. Talk to the owner of the truck stop to call the police, to get help. The police are not going to arrest you. They will take you to a safe place to get help. They will take you to a program. They will take you to a shelter. They'll get you help. But get to a place of safety and get away from your trafficker.
Dr. Keyes, thank you so much for this very interesting and informative podcast. We look forward to speaking with you again in the future on another topic. And Father, I don't know if you have any last words, but just like to thank you again for this, for all you're teaching us.
Thank you, Tom. I think that was very informative, and I think we really need to spread the word about this, because I think so many people are unaware of just how grave a problem this is and how unfortunately widespread it is in our country today.
Very true. Thank you, Dr. Keyes.
And thank you, Tom.